Thank you. All right. Thank you all for having me. Am I supposed to do a thing? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I have always wanted a longer title than Patrick, I think, but he has a lot of responsibilities. I don't want that. I want to start at the beginning. So just a little bit of background about me, because I also know that we're recording, so that people might not, time is an illusion, but just to mark the things that I've done, I am a game designer by trade. That is my background. I went to school for it. And then immediately after I graduated, I started working at Game Chicago Design Lab. That is a game lab here on campus that was ran and is still ran by Patrick Jagoda. We made educational games there. I'm currently the assistant director of the Weston Game Lab. And so that's where I'm a part of the Forecast Lab's work. I'm also the programmer of Waking Oni Games. And then I've been working with Patrick for about 10 years now. We've made educational games, transmedia games. We're now moving into our art game era. And so this is an image from that art game called Afterlife. Some of you might have seen images from it. Some of you might have not. I can't necessarily describe what that project is, but we're still working on it. So just to say that I've worked on a variety of projects with a number of different processes on them. So board games, card games, digital games, alternate reality games, things that aren't even games, but are more so like applications that might have some game elements, and then like game-based educational STEM programs, right? And so each of these have their own process to them. So depending on what it is that you're all interested in doing, and or if you're interested in games, but you might find yourself in a slightly different area, I will be a person to help ask or help you through the process. So before I start talking, I would like to know, what would you all want to know? Like, what are the things as we go through this that you are in desperate need of knowing, especially since many of you have game dev teams? Yes, and this is the moment, yes. Absolutely, yes, Nicole.
What order should things be done, and what timeline should you try to set for accomplishing different things, i.e. like game mechanics, narrative ideas, starting to program, art assets? What is the order, and how do you determine that for different projects?
Okay, so let's put like order and timeline. Right now, this presentation is pretty high level, but as I talk, I'll kind of go through that. Yes?
What are some difficulties you run into that we might not anticipate, and how have you navigated them?
Absolutely. Difficulties and how to manage that. Other questions? Yes?
How do I scope a game?
How do I scope a game? Okay, so I was about to add an entire thing about scope here. We're just gonna talk it out. That's interesting. Other thoughts, questions? Is this it? Really?
How do you ideate and gain experience in areas that you are less familiar with? If you're a game designer, how do you start to think about narrative? Or if you are a narrative person, how do you start to think about art style, things like that?
Perfect. All right. So how do you learn a new skill, we'll say? Am I staying in frame? I'm sorry. Yes.
Where can we go to find resources to help us, not just opening up Unity and making a game, but resources outside of that?
Okay, resources. All right. How many of you pitched a project in UGD? Okay. How many of you have teams? Like, you actually have people on the teams? All right. Cool. What are you all doing? Like, what are you all interested in for the people who don't have teams? Are you just here to learn about the process? Okay. Just want to learn. Okay, cool. I do that to not call you out, but I was just making sure. It's like, what are you doing here? Get out. No, you're all welcome here. Okay. So this is going to be kind of high level because I wasn't sure necessarily what are all the things you all need to learn or want to learn, but we're just going to go ahead and get started. Step one, every team, every studio has their own process. Yo. It's like, is that me? So every team, every studio has their own process. There are some commonalities between different teams, but everyone has their own particularities. And I'll show you like a graphic a little later on about a project that I worked on, yes?
We got one more question
Oh,
from the Twitch chat.
hey Twitch.
Can you talk about avoiding crunch?
Can you talk about avoiding crunch? Absolutely. Crunch is definitely not good. Actually, we should start there. Actually, I'm going to address that now. So you all are here at the University of Chicago, and I hear that this is a very stressful institution. I have not taken any classes here, but I have seen you all take classes, and I see the stress that is induced. I too was a student once upon a time. And so the things that you learn as a student actually create bad habits that people take with them once they go into the industry and once they go into the real world. For instance, oh my gosh, I have a paper that's due tomorrow. I really, really, really want an A on that paper. So do you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna pull an all-nighter, and you're gonna pull an all-nighter, and guess what? You're gonna be successful. And guess what? You're gonna get an A. And congratulations, you just got an A on a paper because you pulled an all-nighter. So that means if you can, you can accomplish anything now. You just have to crunch, right? Oh no, I have something due. I want to make something. I want to, again, work on a project, or let's say it's critical video game studies, and it's like, hey, I have this thing, I have this idea. I'm going to crunch, and it is going to be successful because you are all awesome people, all right? And you will continuously be rewarded for your bad behavior. And that is one problem with crunch. Sometimes with crunch, it is absolutely because people cannot manage a project because people have bad managers. But the game industry is really good at taking advantage of people who, will allow themselves to be taken advantage because you want to make a great experience for people. All right, so step one, learn now, even though you're at University of Chicago, this is actually a great place to do that, to try not to crunch. If at any, actually treat it like a game that you can get better at over time. Why submit a paper to get an A, let's say, and then not sleep for 16 hours when you could just submit the paper, see what you get. Maybe it's actually already at an A-. Wow, you've just learned where your paper is right now, and you could then have a conversation with your professor to see how you can make that paper better. In the same way that you all as game designers should go ahead, play test it. See how your players feel about it right now. If they're like, it's amazing, wow, you're great, done, ship it. If it's not amazing, you at least know, and then you can start having conversations about what it is that you need to do. So step one to avoid crunch, start now. Really try and start now. If at any point you feel like you have to crunch on something, actually try to not do that. And I'm saying this as a person who had to unlearn how to crunch because I was doing the same thing in college. I was really good at staying up for 48 hours and jamming it out. Network games was really great. Now I'm old. I can't do that anymore. So I really want you all to take that to heart because you will be rewarded for bad behavior and the game industry will take advantage of that. But outside of that, there are generally 4 project phases when it comes to a game: ideation, pre-production, production, post-production. Again, every studio might have some more elements of this, but these are generally what you're going to be dealing with. Also, I just want to say that this is more like a conversation, so you should totally raise your hand, ask questions. I'll repeat back the questions for our friends on Twitch, on the internet, but this is a conversation. So, all right, let's start with ideation. So this will also start to get to like, well, how do we like ideate? What's going on here? This to me is actually the thing that you already do well, just people generally, what they do well. Ideation, you should have about 3 different steps to it. You have your standard brainstorming process, you should do research, but also you should rapid prototype. That is also a part of ideation. If at any point you're just sitting and talking and not doing anything based on the ideas that you're throwing out, you are speculating. You are just having conversation, but you're not designing. Designing means that you are acting on the ideas that you are talking about, right? So writing a game design document is documenting your ideas, but like designing something means that if you have an idea for a level, you're going to draw it on a piece of paper, right? You're going to try and just put it into Unity and see what it looks like. You're going to grab blocks and look at it, right? That is doing something so you can validate it early. But let's go in a linear fashion. Brainstorming. Groups or individuals are coming up with ideas. This is a really great process to learn who your team members are and how they think, right? You should, it says can dedicate a note taker. No, you should dedicate a note taker because at some point you can throw out ideas verbally, right? But sometimes people aren't comfortable talking out loud. Sometimes people need a moment to sit and think. They're more introspective. And as a team, you should be respectful of that and give them the opportunity to write out ideas and then share back with the group, right? This is a very simple process. We're not gonna spend too much time on this. This is super simple. Now, I have 2 of these slides. That's a better image. Actually, I'll say with this one, because there are images, the ways that you decide to keep track of your notes, it's really dependent on you. I'm a fan of if you choose to use like Post-it notes, which I think are great, you can stick them up on a wall, and if you're trying to figure out how do you validate your ideas, right? Because as you brainstorm, you shouldn't actually discuss the idea itself. You should really only generate ideas, even if it's stupid. If it's like, oh my gosh, I think our character should be a chicken. Don't ask why, just write it on the board or keep it written on the Post-it note, right? The goal is to focus on quantity, not quality, all right? So you can use Post-it notes. You can also use written tools like Notion. Notion is great. Notion, I think, is like the indie game dev tool of choice right now. I can't tell you why. 5 years from now, it won't be, but doesn't matter. Use a tool. Again, don't discuss the ideas you brainstorm. This is not the moment. Generate, generate, generate. All right, then you can absolutely validate. One way that you can do that is, especially if you have Post-it notes, is do what's called a dotmocracy. And this is coming from like the design world, which I sort of kind of hate, but they have good ideas sometimes. So you can give everyone little star stickers or little dots, and you can have people look at all the ideas and stick that star or that dot on that Post-it note, and you can have that democratic process of voting through those stickers so people can read it and talk about it. Or you can actually later on figure out like, okay, so which one of these are more feasible, right? But it really depends on what it is that you want to do. But again, as you brainstorm, don't discuss the idea. Yes?
So what would be a good upper limit as we were looking at
Ooh, a number of ideas?
Yeah, what's like how many should we go for, I guess?
So that's a good question. So I don't usually, I usually don't set a number. I usually set a time limit. I usually set like a time limit of like 10 minutes to just rapidly come up with ideas. I feel like coming up with 30 random ideas is very easy. When you have a group of people and everyone comes up with 5, you can generate large numbers. But the question is to generate as many as possible in a short amount of time, right? So I prefer time limit as opposed to a number. But again, every studio has their process. If you all are like, actually, we should come up with 60 ideas, then set that for your group. That's totally fine. Any other questions? Thank you for that question. Thank you for making this a dialogue. Okay. Do make sure everyone is heard. Brainstorming as a process, especially if it's vocal, prioritizes people who are extroverted. Sometimes it's focused on charisma. And sometimes there are people there who want to say something, but if you don't have a process and it's just people blurting out words, people might not feel comfortable with that. And so this is why the facilitator is important, to make sure that you're looking and watching for people who haven't said anything just yet. Okay. And it's not only just the facilitator's job, but you all as a team should be looking out for everyone, right? Because this is also a process where you should care about one another. Don't forget to yes and. If someone's idea has sparked another idea, go ahead and yes and it. And this is a great way to start to combine ideas, right? If two ideas don't necessarily make sense, you could see what it looks like to put things together, and you can generate a new idea from there. Set a time limit. I thought this was the next one, but I don't know what order my slides are in. Second step, research. Research can look different for different groups. I'm really into, for artists, make mood boards, right? So look on Google image search, find some images, make some mood boards. Go on field trips. So one of the projects that the Waking Oni team is working on is going to be set in Chicago. Fortunately, some of us live in Chicago. So where are the places that we should go? Where are some of the places that we should incorporate into our game, right? Go to places or go and find images of those places. If you are looking at certain mechanics or are trying to innovate on certain game mechanics or genres, ask people how they feel about those genres, right? Make sure that you also write down and save your research. This is not a plug for Notion, but you could use Notion, you could use Google Drive. Whatever you need, whatever is the best tool for you as a team, use that tool, because the goal is to make sure that everyone is on the same page as much as possible. And this is the key point, because as you validate your idea, you do your research and you figure out what you want to do, you don't immediately just go into let's go into pre-production. Actually, you should start rapidly prototyping your ideas, because ideas only sound good in theory, but what about in practice? Because games are these interactive systems, right? And you don't know what you don't know until players start interacting with your ideas. So you can think of a rapid prototype as a way to explore the idea of your game, but it is not a game demo. That is something that's different. If you're using this as a way to say, this is what my game is about, and I'm gonna go and try and showcase this at no. The rapid prototype is only to make sure that you can validate your idea to see, is this even a good idea? The way that you communicated this idea, does that actually work in terms of code, in terms of visuals, in terms of sound? Can you try to make it work? Because if you can, you've just validated your idea, and now you have a really good jumping off point to start moving into pre-production and to pre-production. I felt like I had a slide here. Is this? Okay, well, let me see. You have a question, yes?
We asked this for every section. If I'm making a game on, say, a 3-day or a 10-week or a 20-week timeline, how long should I spend brainstorming?
So it is definitely proportional to the amount of time that you have. So if you have if you're working on something and it needs to be completed in 3 days, you really want to spend 10, 15 minutes max brainstorming, and then you want to just start rapidly designing the thing. Because at that point, the thing that you're designing in 3 days is at no point going to actually fit onto this process at all. you are actually only in ideation phase. And at the end of those 3 days, you're gonna have a prototype to validate that idea, which will be a great jumping off point for something else. But that is not like, so if you have something in 10 weeks or 20 weeks, I think it's definitely possible. I think it comes down to what's your skill level. I'm sorry. The question is, if you have 10 weeks of time to work on something, how much time should you spend ideating? Because you've used 10 weeks, this implies that you're kind of working on something maybe for class or just in the quarter system here. I don't know, 10 weeks feels very specific to me. With 10 weeks, I would honestly think that you should only spend maybe about a day or two brainstorming a topic or brainstorming mechanics, because the real question will be, considering all the other things that you have going on in your life, and you know you have to finish something in 10 weeks, not knowing what might come up, you're actually going to need to spend more time in terms of production, in terms of like making sure that you are all communicating well. The idea at that point, you don't need to spend that much time talking about it. In fact, if you spent 5 weeks talking about something, you've never made something, no, absolutely not. Like 2 days, just maximum 2 days. And that's you brainstorming asynchronously. Absolutely.
Number one, in this first phase, you mentioned like conducting interviews and asking about opinions and rapid prototyping. How soon should you get people in front of what you have?
Oh, as soon as possible.
Like people outside of your group.
You're so right. I'm so sorry. So the question is, in the ideation phase, I mentioned a section on conducting interviews. So how soon should you have someone play your prototype, or just talk to you about your idea? Is that both? So I'm always a fan of, like, when you have an idea in your mind, and you all as a team have agreed on it, start talking to other people, because again, you're going to do your research, but there's so many people who've played so many different games, who have so many different experiences, that they might actually be able to give you information that you've just missed, or might be able to make a connection that you had no idea about. So in terms of your ideas, go ahead and continue to validate your ideas. Go and talk to someone and say, okay, I had this crazy idea. Would you just give me 5 minutes? Give me your thoughts and opinions, right? Because that's also a part of your research process. And then in terms of your prototype, like as soon as you start like making something, always get it validated, always get it tested by either someone who's in your team, someone who's not a part of your team, who has no idea what you're talking about. And it's like, if I showed you this image, what feeling does this evoke? Like for my character design, what does this character say to you? And if what people say is the opposite of what you want, you know that you aren't going in the right direction. But I will say, do not spend a lot of time in that moment polishing either, right? This is why when we think about art, artists sketch, and they sketch really quickly, because you want to figure out the shapes, the silhouette, right? What is the pose going to be before you spend a lot of details or a lot of time filling in those details, right? So this is a balancing act, especially when you are like working on something that you care so greatly about, right? You want to not be precious with your ideas. You want to get it tested as soon as possible, but you also don't want to spend too much time polishing it, because you should be willing to throw away that idea and try something ever so slightly new. Okay. Did I answer your question? Okay. So that's ideation. Ideation's pretty chill. The best part, the easiest part, I find, especially for either like really like new game designers. It's just like, this is a great place to be, because this is the most fun, the most freeing. You don't have to think about the consequences of your decisions or the implications of what it is that you're doing. It's just like, this is fun, big sky, dream big moment. But once you enter into pre-production, this is where things start to, you're gonna have to start to answer some questions, right? So pre-production is really the planning of the game's design and production, which means that you're gonna have to answer two major questions. What is this game actually going to be, right? There's the idea of the game, but what is it actually going to be? How is it actually going to play? And then how do we manage this project, right? Pre-production also doesn't require a large team at all. A lot of the pre-production that I've done actually has a very small team. A lot of the Forecast Lab projects, so this is the kind of transmedia collective, Patrick Jagoda, Heidi Coleman, Mark Downey, and myself, and Ben Kolak, we're kind of like the core team of people. Anytime we work on a project, we're currently working on a project, it's just the 4 or 5 of us at any given moment. And then when we need to start to scale up, that's when we'll go and add other people. But to figure out what is this game going to be, how is it actually going to work, what are all the verbs, right, those game mechanics, what is it really going to look like, what is it going to sound like, we're answering that right here. And how do we manage this? Like, do we need to get a production manager, someone who can just manage the timeline for us, or is the project going to be small enough where because we've worked with each other for approximately like 10 years, we all have a very specific skill set. We know what we are good at, and we know what we're not good at. And because we know this, there are times where we might not actually need a kind of a middle person who's gonna manage us. We can just do the tasks ourselves. But that only works because we're a team of like 4 or 5 and we've been working with each other for 10 years. That is probably not the case for you all, yes. Ooh, the question is, do I have any advice for people who are stuck in this process of like what the game is going to be, and how do we manage this process? So, yes, in the sense of my first thought my first question, because I'm thinking about this like a designer, is like, what is causing the blockage? Do you feel like we don't have any good ideas? Absolutely. So then for something like that, that's where rapid prototyping is really going to be your best friend. Sometimes I also think it comes down to like scope, because if you pick an idea and then you just start to talk out loud about all the different aspects that are needed to go into that, you might think there's actually like 40 different things here. Maybe we need to start smaller. Maybe we need to start simpler. How do you build, and there's a little slide about this, like the minimum viable product to figure out like, is this idea good, right? So you really need something very simple. So wait, you all are the group, are you doing like the comic?
Yes, that's one of the things that I was asking about just by
Absolutely. But I honestly just start simple, right? Like most games have a core loop to them. And so a core loop is basically like the thing that a player is going to constantly return to. So let's use Mario, for example. In Mario, you're going to constantly like jump on creatures' heads and like go through pipes, grow big. There's probably other things, but we'll stay there, right? So if you're building a platformer and you know that your character is going to like need to jump a lot, right? But you have some crazy like rocket boost, double jump, invisible, I don't even know if you want to add on to that. Step 1 is like, okay, how do we like, what is just the smallest thing that we can do? If we can just get jump working, great. Now that we can jump, what's that crazy thing that we can add on next, right? Do we need to like double jump, triple jump, right? Just starting very small and validate that quickly, right, is my main thing. Managing the project, this comes down to scope. And this comes down to, do you know what you are already capable of? If you feel like at the beginning of the project you do not have the skills necessary to work on that project, that is okay, especially like You all are students. We're all learning together, right? So that's totally fine. Then the question becomes, okay, what are the things that I want to learn on this project so that I can focus on that thing and learn that thing? Because maybe the game idea is actually a little too large. It's not going to be complete in 10 weeks or a year. Maybe it's something that actually requires 20 programmers or like someone who just knows like so much about shaders to really make this work. Totally fine, right? I have game ideas that I've sat on for 10 years because I know right now I'm not ready to start working on that, and that's okay, right? So then it's the question of, okay, well, what is the thing that I can do to start learning about the design process, right? And so when it comes to scope, yes, there's project scope. These are the things I need to do for my project. But also what I want to make sure is that we sometimes don't conflate, here's my project, here's my magnum opus, with I also want to learn how to do this stuff, right? These are actually two different goals, and they are helpful, right? I've learned a lot about, let's say, dialogue systems because I'm working on a project that requires dialogue systems. I could talk about dialogue systems for days because I've just spent too much time with them, right? But I know that I'm knowledgeable enough about coding, for instance, to be able to dig myself out of a ditch if I've just started to go down a specific rabbit hole. I know what I know, and I know what I don't necessarily know, but I know how to search for it. I know how to find that information. But if you don't know what you don't know, this is a really difficult problem to be in, right? So how might you think about with your project, what is it that you absolutely want to learn? And think of it as a learning process. And then think about it from a smaller scope, a smaller scale in that way, right? If this is a moment where you want to learn how to use Unity, that's great, right? What is the project that you're working on so that you can actually just learn Unity and maybe get one small aspect of your game up and running by you learning Unity, right? Scope it down. Because another issue, and this is now like life lessons that I have learned. Things take a lot of time, and learning a skill is hard. Learning is hard, right? But there are things that we like to learn, right? There are things that we enjoy and we don't mind learning. If you play piano and you're trying to really learn this classical piece, because you enjoy piano, you might be willing to just go through and push through and learn this piece. That's great. If you are learning piano for the first time, maybe you don't start with a very difficult piece because you're not actually at that skill yet. And if you're trying to work on something that's such at a high skill, then you might get a little disappointed because this thing is not coming easy to you. Well, of course not. You're learning. It takes time to learn these things. They say, I don't even know if this is true, but the saying is it takes 10,000 hours to like be a master at something, right? And you're trying to do the thing that a person who spent 10,000 hours they've gone through that process, they've gone through that work, and they can accomplish this thing. And you've only spent like 2 hours on this. Be kind to yourself, right? Because you're learning. And so how might you scope it so that it's like, okay, what is the smallest piece that I can do? Because if you keep hitting yourself with very hard problems, you can actually get to a point where you're no longer motivated to do that thing because it just feels impossible. It just feels hard. No, you can learn it. We just need to make sure that you're scoping it correctly. But we're only still in pre-production. You see, like game design, also just to be clear, game design in the process, it's really a grind. Like people are like, oh my gosh, this is like the best thing ever. I just have such a like artistic goal to hit. And I'm like, absolutely, I love that for you. But having made a bunch of, it's really just a grind. It's really a mental state of like, how long are you willing to work on this thing because you really enjoy the outcome of it? Because the process of it is not necessarily a pleasant one. There are times where you're just gonna have to throw things away, or some stakeholder is gonna come in and say, actually, we need more particle effects. And then it's like, why? Why do we need that? Like, why are you saying this? Like, you don't even know anything about the game design process, and you're just like, oh, this will make things more exciting? No, get out of here. you're just going to be fighting at so many different angles, right? So be kind to yourself and also get mentally prepared for the design process. But you can do that by starting small. Continuing with pre-production, this is a moment where you're going to want to start figuring out how are you going to work on your production, like how are you going to produce this game? How are you going to actually make it happen? You might have heard of waterfall versus agile. Is this like a thing that you all have heard of? No? Oh, let me tell you the story. So back in the day when people were like, actually cars are still being made, but like Ford was like coming up with like cars, like we're gonna make them. The best way to make cars is through this like assembly line process, right? And so that assembly line process kind of moved into the kind of tech industry, the game industry, in the sense where it's kind of like you have to think about all of your requirements. What are all the things that you need to do to make this car happen? You need wheels, you need an engine, you need the outer body and all this other stuff. Cool, now it needs to be able to go from point A to point B. You're gonna need to now design it, right? But you're gonna design it only after you finish your requirements. Once you've designed everything, like literally everything, you're then gonna implement it and you're gonna put it all together. And once you put it all together, that's when you're gonna test it. And if the tests go well, you're gonna maintain it. This is really, it's a good process if you are used to working on that particular product, right? It works really well with cars because we already have really strong knowledge about making cars. Games are a little different. Even if you have a good idea about a game of like, I want to make a 2D platformer, great. Like there are so many of them out there. But even still, because they're all interactive experiences, things can fail really quickly. And so this is why waterfall, it's all connected in ways where if one of these steps mess up, you're gonna have to go back and repeat the process. We don't like waterfall. What we like is this kind of agile method. And what agile is really focused on is being able to like get an idea, test it really, build it, test it really quickly. If it doesn't work, you can throw it out or you can continue to build on top of it. The goal is to minimize like being stuck at a process and going back and doing it over again. It's, okay, let's continue to use our platform example. I need to make a character controller so that our character can jump. Great, let's go through it, let's make a jump. All right, I think they have to jump like, this high. All right, we're gonna try and implement it, cool. When I press the space bar, the character jumps. Yay, we did it. Okay, now that we know that the jump works, we now need to implement a double jump. Okay, now that we have the jump feature, let's go ahead and we're gonna deploy the original jump, right? Then we're gonna go ahead and go back and say, all right, let's implement a double jump. How high does the double jump need to happen? At what point can you double jump in your original jump, right? And you're gonna go through that, and once it's all tested and people are enjoying it, you're gonna ship it, right? So you're gonna ship things out in terms of the features and not these large amorphous chunks. You're gonna always test early, test fast, test often, get information as soon as you can and then ship it, as opposed to, well, how do you know the design is going to work really well if you're already, like you don't know, you're testing all the way down here. And if someone says the design of this is terrible, oh, well, now you have to go all the way back. But if you tested your design early and got it approved, you can then maybe say, all right, now we're gonna implement this. So game development is all about agile development. Do not plan forever, okay, right? Like here you can stay in these phases forever. You wanna go really quickly, right? As fast as you possibly can, because with agile, again, your goal is to think by doing and see if your ideas work. Agile does not mean that you won't run into problems. It just means that you're going to notice problems sooner rather than later. Oh, amazing, yay. What? Wait, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. That's great. So you also might have heard the term a vertical slice. Have any of you heard this term in the game industry? Perfect. I hope the board, and especially the FMV game team.
You spent 3 hours telling me about it.
I did. Like, I'm really like intense about this vertical slice. Okay, let us imagine we have a delicious 6-layer cake. Look at all these colors. It's amazing. Now, we can think about game development in that same way because games are systems, right? So you have systems on top of systems. So you might have a platforming kind of system, you might have a combat system, you might have a crafting system, a dialogue system, all of these different systems in your game. The great thing about kind of pre-production is, again, because you want to rapidly prototype and test your ideas early and often, a vertical slice is like taking one small sliver of the game systems that you want to have in your game and building it in such a way where people will have a really good idea about what your game is supposed to be about. This is a moment where you can kind of classify it as like a small demo to represent your game. Your rapid prototype is really just to say, like, can I do this? Is this possible? Can we validate this idea? Yes, okay, great, throw it out, whatever. But the vertical slice is near like release ready aspect of your game. So if your game has, I don't know, a combat system, a crafting system, a like first person perspective, and you can then also transition to a third person perspective. I don't know why, but maybe that's what you're doing in your game. You want to make the smallest features of each of those and put them all together and see if they work. So that's what is mean by a vertical slice. It's just a small sliver, but a really, really detailed version of your game. A horizontal slice is basically if you just took one of the layers, right? If you have a combat system, you're going to actually just work and build the combat system, and you're just going to have one of those slices of cake and see, like, is this good? But it might not have any art, it might not have any sound attached to it. That's just a horizontal slice. But a vertical slice has all of it. Any thoughts or questions about that? Yes?
It's recommended that we generally try and build things in a vertical slice.
When you're in this like kind of this final end of pre-production, yes, because this will also give you kind of your project goal, like what you're actually trying to hit, right? So it means that you understand your core loop, your core game loop, what's drawing players to your game. You have a really solid understanding of your art style, your sound choices, right? Some aspect, if you have dialogue in your game or narrative in your game, some aspect of the characters or the writing is done here, and you're just gonna create that small aspect of it. Wouldn't recommend to be like, let me just make the beginning of my game, because the beginning of your game as you make it could change. Aim for something like, if what does like the 2 or 3 hour mark of your game look like, and make the vertical slice for that, because your beginning could change, but that core loop, that core aspect of your game, probably not going to change. Now, this is where my example is. Haha, it lives. So I will bring an example up from the Game Chicago Design Lab. We had an Amnesia Fortnight. So Amnesia Fortnight is coming from like Double Fine, where they're working on a project, and then they're like, let's forget about that project for 2 weeks, and let's just make something else. And so we've been talking a lot in that group about, well, what does it look like to make something that's civilization-like, or kind of this like SimCity style game, but we make it for health instead. We've been talking so long about it that, we've already gone through our ideation phase. Like 2 people on our team were just like hardcore like SimCity and like civilization players. So like that's the research, it's done. And we didn't have to necessarily rapidly prototype it because we've been working with each other for 5 years. But you could view this as a rapid prototype, but we viewed it more like a vertical slice. And that is because we were like, okay, let's make a 2D digital game where we're going to focus on God games. That was what we were talking to the researchers about, because they had no idea what we were talking about. We're like, God games, where you're like acting like a hand of God and moving things around at the systems level. And they were like, oh, cool. So we're going to situate players as the major city official. You know, there's going to be a variety of health concerns. And what we're going to do is we're going to dispatch a bunch of professionals in mobile health units to different neighborhoods, and they're going to look like hotspots. We kind of drew this up really quickly and all this other stuff, and it was cute. And so then we spent like 2 weeks, just like only 2 weeks, like, oh, man, can you click on it? The technology exists. I really wish I had a tragedy. Maybe I should have rapidly prototyped and tested this PowerPoint. And that is on learning. Well, okay. At some point, I'll share it with you all. It's kind of cute. I was like, oh, anyway. Next. So what we learned was to fail fast, fail often through the process. Because it was a really good way of understanding, like, okay, what are all the back-end systems that we need to build this game? What stats do we need? What professionals do we need? What's their kind of power is going to be? What are their animations going to look like? What's the sounds going to be? All of these things in this 2-week period, we were able to rapidly prototype, send it to the researchers, and they were like, oh, this is possible? We can make games like this? Yes, yes. All right, so once you make a vertical slice, that's a really great jumping off point for production. All right, we have not made the game yet. I would even recommend that maybe thinking about your UGD projects as a means to just make a vertical slice. Right? Maybe you're not actually going into production and doing all the things, because the game that you might have pitched might be really large, might actually take a few years to make. A lot of the games that I've worked on have taken 2 to 3 years to make, and they are simple games. Right? They are like simple. We are not even at the level of like Rockstar, Riot. No, they are simple games, and they've taken 1 year or 2 years to complete. So maybe you can think about your development process only as a vertical slice, because then that means that scoped you down in such a way where you don't have to think about all these systems. If a person plays your game for 5 minutes, what is the thing that they need to take away from your game experience? Mechanically, visually, auditorially, like what is it that they need? Build that. But once you're in production, we're focusing on 2 main goals. You've got you're working towards an alpha, and then you're working towards a beta. So once you have your vertical slice, you're going to want to start thinking about all the different features that you need to really expand on that vertical slice. All right. So if you have a combat system and you made a small sliver of that combat system, what are all the other things that you need to flesh out that combat system? Do you need to expand? Are you going to have different enemy types? Because in a vertical slice, you might only have 1 enemy. Are you supposed to have 10 different enemies? How are they supposed to act? Right? Do they have different powers? Do they have different health points? This is the time to start thinking, like, not only thinking about that, answering that, and then writing that down as a task. How many animations are you going to need? Right? What is the engine that you're actually going to be making this in? This is something that you should figure out in the ideation phase, because when you make your vertical slice, you should be making it in the engine that you're going to be making the entire game in. I always choose Unity. And it's not to say that you can't switch engines, but you will lose time because you're switching engines. Right? So, you're looking at all of the things that you've built in your vertical slice, you're expanding on that, and you're writing them down as tasks. And then you're going to look at those tasks, and you're actually going to try and break them up into smaller features, right? If someone's like, oh, wow, I need to make a character controller, right? A thing where I'm controlling the character. What do you mean? How is the character moving so that you can then build out that controller, right? We've talked about jumping as a control, but you can also, like, maybe you can attack, right? How does that combat work? How many attacks do they have? Do they have magic powers? That all goes into some aspect of the character controller. Yes.
Not exactly sure how to articulate this, but I guess when you are working on making a vertical slice,
Yes.
how do you go about putting thought into like making sure you're implementing things in a way you can expand on later?
Yeah. So the question is, thank you, Isaac. How do you design your vertical slice in a way where you can expand on it later? And I think every developer is going to have their answer to that, but for me, I haven't produced a vertical slice where I have like absolutely used that same code base completely. Like it gives me an idea of what I am supposed to do, so that when I start to expand out these systems, I can now think about how am I going to better connect these things. So I usually throw out my vertical slices. Yeah. Maybe some people don't, but I will throw out a vertical slice, no questions. Like, I'm not married to it at all. In fact, to just make the vertical slice sometimes, like there are shortcuts I've done in the back end where I'm like, let me flag that. I will never do that again. But I am here to make sure that people get kind of like the version of the experience I really need them to. This is like a Wizard of Oz moment, right? Where it's just like in the back, it's just duct tape and me like moving things. But for the vertical slice to get you that fantasy of like whatever it is I'm playing, I'm like, great, throw it out and do it better now. So your alpha, so after you kind of started to expand things out, you've got your task list going, it's kind of going great. You can now start thinking about your alpha versus your beta phase. Your alpha phase is when your game is supposed to be feature complete. So these are like the large like items in your game where if they don't exist, like you don't really have a game. So when I talk about something like a crafting system, right? Crafting as a system is a feature, right? And so you will want to have that feature even at the base level just done. If your crafting system requires you to combine elements or go and find and hunt resources, you will need to think about how are you spawning those resources on a map. That's a feature, right? So you'll want to have all the basic features of your game done. It's not polished at all, but it is totally playable, right? There will be bugs. There will be so many bugs, and you will start tracking those bugs. You can start trying to fix some of those bugs, especially if they're like game breaking. But if they're like small, minor bugs of, oh no, I'm walking this direction and this texture flickers in and out, put it on a list. Keep moving. And so when you hit your alpha phase, it gives you a really good idea of what the entire overall game is going to be. It is bigger than your vertical slice. You're getting really close to you have all your layers of your cake. It's not icing, it doesn't have any icing on it, but you've got all your layers and they're just laying there and they're looking cute and they're 6 different colors, right? Once you have your alpha done, and that's when you're really, again, you're just building and you're testing and you're going in that kind of the agile method, right? Where you're starting small, you're building up, you're testing it, you're deploying it. You're starting small, you're building up, you're testing it, and you're deploying it. Whether that's code, whether that's animation. For our Waking Oni team, people work for the sound designer, he works on really small 20-second clips of sounds, and he's like, is this a good direction? And then we're like, this is great. Like, don't stop, give me a whole album. He's like, absolutely not. But here's the direction that we're going. Great. And now with that 20-second clip, he can now build out 1 minute and think about the arc. Once your alpha is done, where you got a full sense of the complete game, you can kind of play it from start to finish, there will still be bugs. You'll move into your beta phase. And so beta is like very complete, but still a little unpolished. The beta phase marks kind of the end of production where you've completed everything on your task list. You are feature complete, you are content complete. It means that your animations are all done, your story is finished, lines have been recorded, whatever, all those things in your game that you needed, they are done. And all you're doing in this moment are like tweaking and tuning animations. If someone needs to come back in and re-record a line real quick, that's the moment where you do it. But basically, you're just tweaking and tuning and making sure that it's kind of working in the way that you need it to. One thing that I noticed that I didn't put in here is that throughout this phase, again, you should be play testing, right? Anytime you work on a small feature, do an internal play test. Once you have something a little bit larger where you want other people's external feedback, go ahead and test them. You're play testing throughout production. In your alpha phase and your beta phase, you're always testing. So this is a really great example of how you should kind of think about building. If you're building a vehicle, right, this is the way that people like to build it. Like, let's start with a wheel. Okay, let's build 2 wheels. Okay, let's build a body. Now we have a car. No, you wanna actually even think about, like, what are some ways that you can just shortcut some ideas, right? If the goal is to get from point A to point B, no one has said that you actually needed a car, which is a complex group of systems. No, you want to keep it simple. If you need to get from point A to point B, let's start with a very small feature that'll get us there, right? We're just gonna do, like, and in this metaphor, it's a skateboard. Great. Oh, we need to go a little bit faster. We need to be able to steer ourselves. Cool. Let's go with the scooter, right? And then you're going to a bike, and then maybe you're going to a motorcycle before you go to a car. This is the way that you want to start thinking about that. And so in the same ways that I was talking about a jumping mechanic, right? You jump. What are the other features that you need to add to that jump to make it feel really good? Do you need, like, coyote time where you can kind of hop and then that person can press a button before they fall completely? Great. Do you implement a double jump? Can they now, like, can they fly? Like, what are the ways that you can just build on top of the features that you have? Also, as you do this, you should definitely use a project management tool, whether that is Excel. Like, you could technically do that if your team is small enough, but, like, why would you do that when there are free tools that are actually made for this? I am a big fan of Trello. I like Trello because you have a card system. You can have an entire backlog available for you. You can tag it based off of people's roles, which you should have very clear roles in your team. You can do things based off of sprints, so having people check in on every 2-week cycle. For us, the way that we kind of do that, we did this at Game Changer, was we always had something like in progress and complete. And so anytime we would have a card that we were working on, we would move it into, like, in progress, so people would know what we're working on at quick glance. If it was done, we'll move the card to complete. So it's just a really great way to, one, have everyone on the project know what it is that you're working on, know where you're at, and what is complete. Now, if you decide to go with, like, a backlog sort of system, you shouldn't have too many items that you're currently working on. I don't know what that number will be for you all as a group. It depends on how large your team is, but there is a maximum number of like cards that should be in progress, because if you have too many, nothing's going to get done. Like, and then if you start to notice that things are just piling up here, but no one's moving to complete, you have another problem. And as a project manager, you should ask your team members, what's happening here? Are you okay? Always check in. Make sure the person is doing okay mentally and physically. And then ask, like, but like, we also need you to, like, make these sprites. So what's happening where you are not making these sprites? And that's a moment where you should absolutely be honest. If you actually don't know, if you have gotten a task that you actually don't know how to do, like, be honest with your team member and be like, I don't actually know how to do this, so that you can actually reformulate that card, right? And then you can think about how much more time you need to add. I haven't talked about time with this, mainly because it really also depends on skill, and it's something that the person who's in control of the task has to be able to talk about out loud to the producer. But as a person who has handled, like, professional and, like, indie teams, whatever that person says, I always like to triple it as, like, a number. It's like, oh, it's going to take, like, 2 days. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I'm going to put down, like, 6 days. just to give people wiggle room, because people I find in game development are like really nice, and they're like, oh, they're super hopeful, and it's like, oh, I have this idea, I can make this happen. And I'm like, I believe you, but I don't believe in life. And life is going to cause some problems. So I'm going to add this, not because I don't trust you, I don't trust life, right? So my number is always 3 times whatever the person has just said. But, you know, the longer you work with a person or people, and the more like your expertise is with this, whatever task it is, the easier it will be for you to describe exactly how much time it's going to take you. And at that point, you should even still give yourself some wiggle room, just in case, oh no, my computer crashes and I didn't back up things to the cloud. I don't know, like, always be mindful of life. You can also use Basecamp, which is our project management tool of choice at the MAD Center at the front desk. What's great about it is it operates more like a to-do list. You can tag people to it. You can check it off. It's really great. You can upload documents to it as well. Both of these things are free. Trello's definitely free. Basecamp is probably free up to a certain number. But definitely use a tool. And you want to use a tool that is in the open so that everyone is on top of, the project. And then you're entering to post-production. And post-production is pretty chill. And not really. I'm lying to you. Because there's still a lot to do. Like, again, game design is all a grind. It's really just like keep working on the thing until it's finished. So if we think about beta is a moment where you could ship it, but it's probably not a good idea to ship it, but you could. Post-production is focused on polishing up all the things to make sure you feel really confident and like, yes, I can and will ship this, right? So again, if some textures are flickering in and out, that's the moment where you fix that, right? If the audio kind of cuts out at one point, do like a smooth transition, right? Those are the moments where you're just like polishing it up. Oh, wow. And then I was going to tell you an entire story. What time are we at? I'm at 8:08. Oh my gosh, that's great. And so the last thing I'll say is, like, every group has their own process. This was the Game Changer Chicago design process. And this is the process, like, just an image that I created for the team because we had people who didn't have game design, the knowledge of like the game design process or pipeline. There were people who we came from different schools of game design and how we should do this. So this was a way for us to kind of get on the same page, but it's still basically the same thing, right? Our pre-production and ideation phase were kind of smashed together. So because it was grant funded, we had our planning phase. Once we finished our planning phase and we knew exactly the kind of features that we wanted to have, we would go into the process of building out these features and testing them. We would then conduct research on them. So unlike maybe some of the games that you are all playing and are making, once we release the game, it goes into a research phase. It's not just available for everyone to play. After the research phase is the moment where we release it. But our kind of pre-production and post-production and all that is in this loop here. Because once we release it, we can't actually touch it because that's research. So yeah, that's generally the process. And I'll show like just some images of like, documents are good, but don't stay with documents for too long. Make things, right? This is for the bystander game that we worked on. Like, it started with just drawing things. We were talking, how do we do this? We drew stuff. And at the end, this is what it looked like. But we went through the process of figuring out, okay, like what style do we need? What animations do we need? So we went from this to this over 2 years. This art style specifically was chosen this way because the artist on our team was not a traditional 2D artist. Their background was in film and photography. And we're like, but we need an artist, what do we do? And he's like, okay, what if I recorded video of people and we like made GIFs and then we outline them like a comic? Great. So that's the one way that we scoped it down. We didn't say, let's do something that we don't have the skill set to do. It's, what is the skill set of the people on the team to try and make this project a reality? And that's the way that we were able to get this cool art style. One of our programmers made this mock-up in Photoshop, which was better than the mock-up I did on paper. But it still gives you an idea of what we're trying to do, what the user interface is supposed to be, what the gameplay is. In this example, the player will mirror the other character and will subtract from her tolerance level. We had no tolerance level in the final version of the game, but we talked about a tolerance level. To then get to this moment here, where it's a little reverse, but we have choices, we have characters that we interact with. All right. We started really simply and moved up. And we were able to finish the game. And each of these are actually modular game experiences, where each, I think, of these games were able to be made in probably about just a prototype of it in about 4 weeks with very bad programmer art. I was telling Isaac earlier today, the way that because I built this module here, the way that I tested this was I found 2 penguins who had a walk animation, and I just made 2 penguins go to an igloo that would reveal over time. And they had a cell phone, because why not, right? To then get actual art and put it into the game to get what we have here. Scope, avoid crunch. That's all I have. I think I hit my time. I went a little over, I'm sorry. Ugh. What does this do? The end. Questions, concerns, criticisms, compliments. Yeah. I am also offering myself as a resource to you all who are like, oh my gosh, I have this idea. We've been talking for a while and I don't know how to move beyond the ideation. Like, please talk to me. I'm really good at being like, but what if you did something else? Like ever so slightly, right? Like, I'm gonna help you accomplish your goal, but just in a simpler way. That's what I'm good at. Where can they contact me? Well, I can be found almost any day in the MAD Center, but you should just send me an email, asparrow@uchicago.edu. Thank you. The order, timeline, yeah, I think for the most part. Learning new skills. I didn't answer that one, but I think it depends on the skills that you want to learn. I think it's really about breaking it down into like very small, concrete things that you want to learn. I think if you're like, I want to learn how to build a 2D platformer game, that is too large. You want to be even more specific, right? I want to learn the Unity interface. That's fine. That's easy, right? And once you learn the interface and know what the buttons are, great, cool. I would like to set up a 2D project. That's great, right? So you're slowly building up. You can have a massive vision, but then walk it backwards. What are all the tiny things that you need? And then those resources and Googling that will be very easy, right? Like learning how to create a 2D platformer jump. Like you can easily Google that, and there are so many tutorials online. There are like way too many tutorials actually at this point, where anything that you want to learn for the most part you can find. But in order to actually find that, you need to simplify what it is that you're searching for. The end. Okay, goodbye. Oh.